akin to the issues that you may ask before surgery when you're a philosopher. Been there. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to have anesthesia and I read personal identity papers.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. But I mean, setting that kind of thing aside, I mean, that's not the same thing as brain uploading, which really rests, I think, on a metaphysical mistake.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensees. I'm your host, Parker Case, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode, I have with me another very special guest. I have with me Dr. Susan Schneider, and she is the director of the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University. And I'm struggling with, she's got so many credentials, so many cool positions. I want to say a couple. So she's the former NASA Baruch Bloomberg Chair of Astrobiology. So some of you guys have never even heard of that. That's fantastic. And Technology Innovation at the Library of Congress and NASA. She's awesome. We're going to be talking about her book, Artificial You, AI and the Future of Your Mind. And if you've been paying attention to the podcast lately, you know that I've been thinking a lot about minds and robots. So we're going to get in even deeper here. So I'm really excited for that. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon. You guys are awesome. If this is your top 5 or top 10 favorite podcast, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. I'd love to do this full time. This is the plan A. So this is what I want to do with my life. I'd love to do that. So thank you for those who are making this happen. And for those considering becoming a Patreon patron, you can also find a super thanks button down here somewhere. And you can give a one-time gift just to support the show. Buy me a coffee, whatever you like. That'd be awesome. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or even Spotify, please do leave me a 5-star review and a comment that helps get my podcast out to a broader audience. All right. Well, without further ado, let's bring in Dr. Schneider and let's talk about artificial you, conscious minds, robots, computationalism, and much more. Dr. Schneider, thanks so much for making some time for me here. This is awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we jump in, how do we think about you? Do you think of yourself as are you a philosopher? Are you an astrobiologist first? What are you?
I'm a philosopher.
Okay. Nice.
But I get like bored easily, I think, and
okay.
learning new stuff. So like I'll lock myself away for days just reading quantum mechanics and like I just am like that. And so I tend to be very multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
So a few years ago I started working with NASA and boy, was that fun. And before that, for years I've been thinking about AI because I worked with Jerry Fodor. He was my supervisor.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Teaching, when he didn't have time to teach, I would like teach his minds and machines classes. And back then he was fighting with the connectionists. So it was all about the future of machine learning. We just didn't call it that,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's super cool. So what did you do your dissertation on there?
I did it on the language of thought, actually, and mental content, just the kind of usual stuff.
Sure.
Back then, and fought with Fodor incessantly. Actually, a good chunk of the dissertation was on whether computers could outsmart us.
And
that's awesome. At the time, it was just I was more immersed in arguing with him than anything, and so I argued against. I was stupid enough to argue against my dissertation supervisor in my dissertation. That's really obnoxious.
But you passed, so it sounds like you did well.
He had a tantrum at my thesis defense. He shouted "fuck the brain."
Whoa! Wow, that is a win.
I thought I was going to give him a heart attack because he had just had a heart attack, sadly.
Oh, wow.
I was trying really hard to be, non-confrontational, but he still just boom, like,
wow.
Whoa.
That's wild. Oh my goodness. Wow, that's fantastic. That's the first that I've ever heard anything like that. That's huge. So how'd you end up getting into, just thinking about AI and consciousness in the first place?
Well, I think the AI stuff actually came when I was a grad student with Fodor. But
Okay.
I mean, even before that, I was a transhumanist. So, I mean,
Okay.
before I even became a philosopher, I was, really immersed in transhumanism and futuristic ideas about life extension, brain uploading, all the things that now I'm pretty skeptical, sadly, about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've always been science fiction oriented too. So
Okay.
I think it was in college when a roommate had full, room full of science fiction, and I just started reading it. And
Wow.
it changed my life. To this day, I sort of see the world through the lens of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. Wow. So one for me would be like Philip K. Dick. Like he's really shaped the way I see things, the
Me too.
science fiction. And I have I don't know if I can show you here, but I have it's a tattoo from his Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep from one of the
Oh,
covers.
well,
Just
you
because it
just
like
won
opened
my
my mind.
tattoo award.
That's awesome.
If I was ever going to get one, I'd get that.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's so awesome. Yeah. And now I have a robots lab. I have a
Yeah,
real
that's right.
AI lab, which truly my co-directors, they know what they're doing,
Yeah.
but I'm happy to play around. But I mean, we have all kinds of interesting robots right now.
Oh, it's so cool.
Oh, it's so much fun. I don't have as much time as I want to tinker with the bots. I look forward to that, doing more of that.
Yeah.
But the PhD students really know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's so huge. So, man, I want to jump on that too. But I want to get on the consciousness, and then we could circle back. A lot of my listeners, I've had a lot of philosophers of mind on, and a lot of my listeners will know the hard problem of consciousness. But can you help us with like the problem of AI consciousness?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, consciousness is the felt quality of experience. And so I'm not going to fight like about how to define it because we'll never agree. Philosophers will never agree. But I do think that the felt quality, the introspective, point there is a point of departure. And I think it should also be a point of departure for understanding what we're talking about. We're talking about machine consciousness. We're asking whether there's a felt quality of experience for the machine.
Mm-hmm.
And philosophers will call that phenomenal consciousness. Okay. Now, there's other things going on in the debate over machine consciousness. So, for example, a lot of AI researchers are interested in a more what we might call functional consciousness, whether machines can simulate, but maybe not have that felt quality, mental capacities that are in the human case associated with the neural basis of consciousness.
Right.
Okay. Now, there is a problem called the problem of AI consciousness, which, I bring up in my book. I called it that. And, I was thinking about David Chalmers' hard problem when I did it. So the hard problem, as many in the audience know, is why we need to be conscious. I mean, why isn't it just all information processing in the brain without a felt quality of experience? It's a great problem. Now, in contrast to that, the problem of AI consciousness is the problem of whether an AI has that felt quality of experience, phenomenal consciousness. And note that I'm not asking why, as we are in the context of the hard problem, where we all assume we're conscious.
Yeah.
And we are saying, hey, why are we conscious? In this case, in the case of AI, we're asking whether they're conscious at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you've come up you and I forgot you'll have to tell me who your coworker is there, but you've come up with like you want to test machines. You want to come up with these ACT tests, these AI consciousness tests to tell us, whether they are conscious or whether we're rational in believing them. Maybe you can help me with that too. What is the ACT test, I guess?
Oh,
And
sure.
And is it meant to give us justification for believing that they're conscious, or does it give us like knowledge that they are conscious?
Oh, well, okay. So I'm glad you mentioned, first of all, my collaborator.
Yeah.
Because the reporters who are talking about this, like I was on the BBC this morning, they just never, I tell them the ACT test was developed with Edwin Turner, my dear colleague, when I was at
Turner.
the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. And see, he's an astrophysicist. He's a professor of astrophysics, student of Marvin Minsky over at
Wow.
MIT.
Okay.
But anyway, so Ed and I were just kind of shooting the breeze. And, the idea was, why not probe an AI for consciousness to see if it understands philosophical puzzles or religious puzzles?
Yeah.
So in the context of theology, I mean, and even just ordinary people who aren't studying theology, but they're asking what it all means. It's very common to ask whether there's life beyond death, whether the mind is separable from the body. I mean, there are even movies like Freaky Friday in which people change minds, change bodies, right? Mind shift.
Yeah.
So in our culture and in other cultures, there's kind of, I won't say universal because that's pretty dangerous. There might be an anthropologist listening, but
that's right.
there's a tendency for humans to actually even roughly, at least very roughly, understand that there's something like the possibility of a mind that is separable from a body. And so we were interested in the possibility of whether an AI would get the issue. And of course, we're talking only about a narrow group of AIs. We're talking about highly intelligent language processing AI systems, the kind now that are being developed by Google and other AI companies like the Lambda system and GPT-3, these generative models. So anyway, we were asking whether you could have a question and answer test. And so we devised one that we put out at first in Scientific American and then as a patent application at Princeton University. Patent that.
Wow.
And then I decided I'm going to keep writing this up. And so I put it in my book and I added a bunch of questions. And so that's where things are. But the reporters, because this is in the news right now, whether Lambda is conscious.
Right.
Saying you can run this test on Lambda. And as I said, always, like I said this in the book, in the Scientific American paper, you can only do it at the R&D stage with these machine learning systems before you train them on data sets involving mind. Otherwise, they're going to give baked in answers, right?
Right.
You can't trust those answers. So you can't run the test in those contexts. You have to use other tests. But I have discussed other tests as well, which I'm happy to tell you about.
Yeah, so I knew my brain just would not remember Turner's name because in the same conversation you hear of the Turing test. I'm like Turing, and it just wouldn't stand. A lot of people will point to the Turing test, especially in like popular thinkers. We'll talk about the Turing test. It shows up in science fiction a lot. How would your ACT test? How does that differ than Alan Turing's Turing test?
So Turing's test is designed to probe for intelligence. And the criteria there is whether you would fool a human, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the issue here isn't intelligence, it's consciousness. Now, in the case of the ACT test, we're running it on fairly intelligent linguistic systems. So that kind of makes it a little bit easy to conflate.
Yeah.
But I do think that in principle, a machine could pass the Turing test, but not pass my test.
Yeah.
Or even vice versa. So you can imagine a machine that really sort of sounds like one of these I, Robot short stories, right? By Asimov, where the robot dreams, for example, and it understands the felt quality of experience, but for some reason doesn't convince people that it's human. I mean, maybe it doesn't behave human-like, or maybe Gary Marcus is the judge and he catches it messing up on its causal reasoning, but nevertheless it's conscious. You don't know.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. What a terrible predicament if it is conscious and can't convince us that it is. And it's like, no, I should have rights. And we're like, no, I don't think you're not passing the Turing test, even if you pass the ACT, the ACT test. That's really fascinating. In Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Philip K. Dick poses like this, I think it's Voight Comp test, and it's an empathy test where he gives the androids. I wonder, I wonder how different do you call it ACT or do you say ACT test?
We don't care.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I'll call it ACT. That's a little bit easier.
But that test is a lot like it. In fact, when I
Yeah.
was writing the test, I was thinking of that. I show that to my students, that clip.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I love it. It's a beautiful clip. But notice there, though, Rachel was an android,
Mhm.
and Deckard was running that kind of test on embodied systems that had certain things like retinal
Yeah,
impact.
that was a big one in the movie, especially seeing.
Like they
Yeah.
were looking at the iris and I don't remember the details, but in any case, there aren't any kind of embodied, body specific tests here that we're running. It's more just verbal Q&A, sort of like the Turing test, where you could even do it, with text.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Are you guys running any of that at the Center for Future Mind? Are you guys like implementing the ACT test while people are working on the robots and such?
No, because of the machine learning issue with these data sets.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I don't know, maybe the Defense Department does it at the R&D stage.
Yeah.
I mean, people have reached out. I can't go into detail, but I mean,
Wow.
there are always more sophisticated systems out there than what the public has access to as well.
Right.
I mean, so I hope they're reading the literature. There's other ways to determine whether machines are conscious, if you want me to talk about those
Please,
too.
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, because what I said in my book, in this book, Artificial You, because the first 4 chapters of the book they were on the topic of machine consciousness.
Mhm.
I said, look, we don't just need one test. We need a toolkit, a kit of multiple types of tests that we can actually run when conditions are appropriate, and use that as the sort of rough building blocks to devise better tests.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, what if your test results conflict in the same system? I mean, the dialogue here is just beginning. I think, although if you talk to certain AI experts, they think it's over, the dialogue's over, and that of course machine learning systems aren't conscious. That's what I'm hearing a lot of in the news about Lambda, of course. But what I think you can do is you can examine neural prosthetics. So I think that's the most promising angle, actually. Okay, so there are several ongoing projects right now to put brain chips in people's heads.
Yeah.
To improve and enhance mental function, as in the case of Elon Musk's Neuralink, but also importantly, as neural prosthetics to, for example, provide an artificial hippocampus. So Ted Berger over at USC I think he's in phase 2 clinical trials. I mean, these implanted into, the chips, you're only able to use them in the lab. It's a long story. They're currently independent. They're not inside the head.
Okay.
Although you have to have neurosurgery to connect to the chip in the lab.
Oh, so the connector's in there, but the chip doesn't actually go in yet.
Yeah, for Ted Berger. Ted Berger. Whereas Musk at Neuralink has it, is getting very close, I think, to human clinical trials. He has it in great apes right now, like implanted wireless connection. It's a pretty amazing. What Berger's doing is he's simulating the ability of the hippocampus to lay down new information. The hippocampus is relatively well understood relative to what we know of the rest of the brain, which isn't a lot, but and so these algorithms can actually compute in ways that allow one to lay down new memory. Okay, so what does this have to do with machine consciousness? Well, being married to an FDA regulatory attorney, doing searches on what's being developed right now, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that there are a lot of people developing chips for other parts of the brain, including parts of the brain that are implicated in debates about the neural basis of consciousness as potentially being part of the neural basis of consciousness. And so what I project is that if the chip in the brain efforts continue, and they may very well, either for enhancement or therapeutic purposes, that we will eventually learn whether chips are the right stuff for consciousness. And if millions of dollars are just pouring in, and you've had dozens of years of research and you still can't get a chip that replaces parts of the brain underlying conscious experience, it's not unreasonable to suspect that machines built with those chips aren't conscious.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you have to be careful. You can't make claims about other kinds of chips.
Yeah. Right.
But I think that is a sensible path. It's gonna happen, I suspect. We'll have some kind of sense. And the real question there is whether the same chips will be in the computers that we need to test that are in brains, right?
Yeah. And that'll be some evidence for either for like multiple realizability of, mental states in chips or in organism or not, at least for those chips. That maybe, it'd be evidence that those chips can't support consciousness.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And, the interesting thing there, and I can say this because, your audience philosophers, is we may have instances of multiple realizability already with the artificial hippocampus. Depends on how you frame the issue.
Oh, okay.
Right? I mean, what level of grain, but you could have that, but still have an epic failure when it comes to conscious states. So what I really need for machine consciousness isn't just multiple realizability of a belief state, but multiple realizability of phenomenal states.
Yeah. That would also probably factor into whether like all of our mental states are conscious or not, and like, because if you can have a belief state, right? So then that might even settle that debate too, whether, and the phenomenologists start ripping out their hair right now. That's really fascinating. I wonder about so you call that the chip test. So we have the chip test, right? Is that what you demarcate as the chip
test? Yeah. Okay. And that's my idea. And I wrote that up in my book.
Yeah.
And footnote here, it will help tremendously to understand whether extended consciousness is possible.
Yeah.
You could test extended consciousness. And it's funny because I say this in some recent papers and in a book I'm writing right now. People always say extended consciousness is really hard and the extended mind hypothesis doesn't depend on it. But I think it's a testable claim, and I don't think it's as impossible as people think. Because if you have these neural prosthetics and they can actually realize consciousness, you could just as easily have them outside of the brain, as in the case of Berger's lab.
Yeah, right. The chip's not even in the brain.
Find out through testing the subjects whether there's extended consciousness. Now, I gotta say, I mean, I do have a controversial view here, which is that consciousness is causal, that you could detect, so, I mean, I've had this kind of debate with philosophers in the past, but I won't get sidetracked.
Well, I don't want to go too far and bring you into like too deep water, but that was my next question about like the problem of other minds and the testability of consciousness, and maybe even whether, maybe I'm throwing too much at you, but maybe even whether, philosophical zombies are possible. So like, that's what that, getting back to the question of whether this gives us evidence to believe robots or AIs are conscious or not, or whether it gives us like proof or knowledge that they are conscious. Do we still run into the problem of other minds here? Can we get okay. Yeah. Can we get past it with this? Yeah.
Separate them out, right? I mean, you're always going to have that with any other conscious being.
Yeah.
I'm not worrying about that in this context. And I do think that there's a reason that I personally don't worry about it as much as I do machine consciousness.
Uh-huh.
And that has to do with the sort of inference to the best explanation for why other beings are conscious. I mean, they have, physiology like ours, they behave like ours, and so on. But I think the problem of other minds is harder with respect to machines because they don't have a similar neurophysiology. And so it connects up with the issue, right? But I don't think it's exactly the same issue.
Yeah, and I like the inference to the best explanation. You can go in for natural kinds, or I'm recognizing you as a human. What about like an isomorph of the human brain, but just I don't know, maybe not made of carbon, but still all the same functional roles. I guess that's not a natural kind then, right? Then we still have the problem of AI consciousness, even with isomorphs.
So I talk about isomorphs in the book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's so interesting to think about.
Yeah.
I think that it is conceptually possible that an isomorph could exist and have an artificial brain with components that are replaced in one of these like neural replacement scenarios.
Yeah.
And that it would be a conscious being.
Okay,
I think that's possible.
Yeah.
Conceptually possible. Now, I don't know if it's nomologically possible. Okay, so that's one thing.
Sure.
But I think you might also be asking about zombies, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think zombies are conceptually possible.
Okay.
But you got to, I mean, it's kind of tricky, actually. Maybe let me take a step back.
Sure.
It depends on how you frame the issue. So maybe more careful.
Okay.
I think you have to ask what property natures are in order to really figure this one out. I think what's happening with people who think zombies are possible is that they're often taking an approach to property natures in which properties are categorical. And so you can set up a thought experiment in which the same kind of categorical properties or categorical properties, however you want to say it, are instantiated by a molecule for molecule duplicate, and consciousness is missing. Right. I'm not so sure I'm on board with all of that. I mean, it's a tough debate, actually, like property natures, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to assume categoricity. In fact, I kind of was sympathetic when I slept through that literature to a two-sided view. So I think that can kind of alter whether you think it is even nomologically possible to have zombies. And here I'm thinking there was an interesting paper by John Heil and C.B. Martin on this topic in the past, which I would refer your listeners to.
Yeah.
But, I haven't talked about this in years.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going down rabbit trails.
No. I love metaphysics. But in the book, I'm thinking a lot about the conceptual possibility of artificial consciousness. And I did say that I totally agree with like Chalmers' replacement scenarios, the neural replacement scenario. In his early book on consciousness, where he's talking about fading qualia and all of that. I think that's a coherent thought experiment. But what I'm interested in most of the discussion of the book is the nomological and technological feasibility, nomological possibility, technological feasibility of conscious machines, because I think there's a special ethical interest in figuring this out.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, so all that just to set up the next question about what the mind is, and whether you go in for like emergent properties. Is the mind an emergent thing? Do you have a particular theory of mind?
Great question. Whew. Boy, that's a toughie.
Yeah.
Okay, this is bringing me back to the book that I've owed Oxford for a really long time. I think I'm supposed to write a book on this.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there are a couple of different approaches to mind that are out there if you look at the mind as a substance,
Yeah.
for example, that have been very influential. Mind as bundle of, say, universals or tropes. And then there's this sort of substratum position. So that's one approach. You could just take mind as a reductive category, right? And analyze it, as one would in the metaphysics literature. Okay, so that I'm fine with that approach.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Either one of those approaches. But there's also a kind of question about consciousness here.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that when it comes to what kind of matter makes up the mind, whether the mind is entirely physical, I actually am what I call, I think I called it micromonism in a paper I wrote for a volume edited by my former student, Kenny Peirce, for Oxford University Press. And I wrote a paper called Idealism or Something Near Enough. I'm not an idealist, but the book was on idealism. I was trying to be topical.
Nice. And you went with the Jaegwon Kim or Something Near Enough.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of Jaegwon's.
That's fantastic.
He's great. He's great. So, the view is the fundamental constituents of reality are they're not minds. They're not experiential, but they're proto-minded and proto-experiential.
Like a proto-panpsychist type view?
It's not quite though.
Okay.
But it's very close. I think, and I think that the same entities that science quantifies over, the kind of those entities that are really actually the truth makers for the fundamental physical laws.
Nice.
Are actually the entities I'm talking about as comprising the mind. Okay. And I really should finish this book. I might slip some of this into a book I'm writing right now.
That'd be awesome. Is that
many books right now?
Is the structure then important for those? I forgot what you call it, but like microphysical particles. Is it the structure that gives rise? Does the mind give rise to it?
Okay. Right. And so I don't think there's any special emergence going on here. Remember when I think it was John Searle who said there's boring emergence, this sort of water type emergence, transparency. And then there's this magical, mystical stuff that, where Jaegwon was talking about downward causation. And I haven't found a need for the more exciting kind of emergence, although everything's a mess and everything's weird in physics right now.
Okay. Yeah.
God knows what's going on. Until we understand, fundamental reality, we'd better be careful. Fundamental physical reality is probably quite weird. Yeah. Way weirder than we think.
And how do we define physical and all sorts of craziness?
Yeah. The physical thing can't be actual physics, which is contradictory. It's got to be future physics. But then the problem with that is, what if future physics starts talking the fundamental minds talk? I know.
Right.
You have to be really careful in framing these kinds of issues.
Yeah.
But I think physics does talk about proto-mentalistic entities.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then the structure gives rise, but maybe in the weak case of emergence, maybe that's like Tim O'Connor's. He might go in for special. But do you think the mind is a program?
No.
Cool.
And that's, sometimes it's helpful just to rule out different views, and maybe that helps one arrive at the right view, assuming you've got
or closer to it. Yeah. Right.
Well, assuming you have included the right view in
I know.
group of
Could be
users.
something totally crazy that no one knows yet. Yeah.
But no, I don't think so at all.
Okay.
I think the brain can be described computationally, but in the final chapter
Mm-hmm.
of Artificial You, I argue the mind is actually not a program.
Yeah.
And I think actually, Parker, I noticed in your podcast that you were doing some stuff in philosophy of mathematics.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, I'm into that too.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think the thing that bothers me about this program talk is somewhat simple. A program's an abstract entity.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's not a program's different from a program instantiation. Similarly, when we're asking about the nature of the mind, it's kind of a category mistake. Now, maybe we should be making it, but to be claiming that the mind is a program is to be asking whether the mind is a sort of abstract entity. And I think the people talking about the issue and making the assertions are not noticing that. They're not intending to do it. They're not asking about, say, abstracta. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what they should be doing is asking whether the mind is something like an instantiation of a program.
Yeah.
But so the mind's not a program, I think, for reasons that have to do with the debate moving in the wrong direction. I think we should be, but I'm fine asking whether the mind is a program instantiation, right? Yeah. But then notice how empty claims are about the mind as program instantiation. It does not solve the mind-body problem, because what is the thing that is the instantiation? I mean, that's like re-asking the same question.
Right.
What is a mind, right? And there you can fill in your favorite view, which shows how empty the claim that the mind is a program instantiation is. So, it's funny because we all thought we were being informative. Like back in the day when I was like working with Jerry Fodor and writing my Language of Thought, New Philosophical Direction view book, that is, I just assumed the mind was a program. It was like a slogan. In fact, Ned Block had this great paper, saying the mind is the software of the brain. I think that was the title.
Yeah.
But I think that's actually wrong. Mm-hmm. That kind of view. And I think what was really going on in those older debates was more, we were excited about the brain as a computational engine. Yeah. And, we were kind of merging together mind talk with brain talk, which should not be done. I do it all the time, I'm sure. But I mean, I think we have to be really careful there.
Yeah. Well, that I love that part in the book. And it was echoing something else we read. The class was Brendan Rickabaw's class. It's the philosophy of technology. So if anyone listening wants to go to PBA, check that out. But it was you're mirroring a lot of some points made by Eric Olson about, what would a artificial thinker be? He wrote a whole paper on this, and it didn't get a lot of play. But I had him on the podcast talk about it, and he just goes through a lot of the same stuff that you talk about, where it's like, is it an abstract object? Because that's crazy. Then, like, as soon as the computation is done, now you have this mind, but it's an abstract thing, and abstracta is supposed to not have causal efficacy or anything. And so we think our minds do, and there's all these different reasons. So I loved that you were getting in on that, and it showed why, I might make some of the sciencey folks mad, but that's why you need a philosopher, at the helm of the Center for the New Mind. Like, that's why we need philosophers to be asking these kind of questions and say, look, I see the results that you're making here, but what are you saying is the actual conscious thing? And here's why it can't be that. So I love philosophers, so I want to boast on them any chance I get.
It is good when philosophers get involved. I'll plug for that.
Yeah, and
definitely. I've enjoyed reading Eric's books and interacting with him. We know each other. We've talked. Awesome. We've had these conversations.
Awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it is a good thing for us not to just be in the ivory tower.
Yeah.
Because, all around us, just read the news, there's complete misunderstandings of issues involving the nature of the mind.
Right.
And they do have consequences for the world, right? I tell my students, metaphysics can be a matter of life and death when we're talking about cases like brain uploading, for example, or even machine sentience.
Yeah, or Alcor, right? Like the freezing your brain to survive later.
Yeah. So Alcor, I don't know what where they are with their technology for cryogenics. I've thought about signing up. I don't have a problem in principle with that.
Right. But that's a question, right? That's the question to ask before you sign up is, am I going to survive and what am I? And those kind of questions.
So there's this interesting thing going on with cryogenics, which it used to be just freeze it, revive it later.
Yeah.
That's just a scientific question, whether, I mean, you might like akin to the issues that you may ask before surgery when you're a philosopher. Been there. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to have anesthesia and I read personal identity papers.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. But I mean, setting that kind of thing aside, I mean, that's not the same thing as brain uploading, which really rests, I think, on a metaphysical mistake. But then what started to happen is a couple years ago, the New York Times was doing this piece on Alcor and cryogenic freezing. And I think I talk about this case in my book of Kim Sozi, who, God, it was so sad. She died of a brain tumor. She was young. She was really young, just graduated from college. And she, being a neuroscientist, decided to freeze her brain. But when they froze it, she had had a lot of bleeding due to what happened to her. And so they say that the only way they can revive her is by uploading the contents of the brain to a computer and then sort of fixing it algorithmically, tweaking. And so that means to the extent that that individual is supposed to revive, it's through an uploading maneuver. And I actually am really worried about that because I don't think it's the same philosophically as reviving someone who was cryogenically frozen. When you talk the uploading talk, what you're talking about is this mistaken view that the mind is something like a program.
Yeah.
And that as long as you have some kind of instantiation of the same program, the same individual survives. And of course, philosophers know the difference between types and tokens.
Right.
Different token of the same type. That's what's happening.
And it's not you. Yeah, that's not the same type as you. Yeah.
And the media, just forget it. They're absolutely obsessed. Because if Stephen Hawking said that you can upload, or Michio Kaku said you can upload, never mind these philosophers.
Yeah, and I think the way that would work is if something like substance dualism was true, and you had this soul, and you could upload the soul, but that wouldn't be necessarily the pattern of your thought. You wouldn't be like your thought pattern or whatever. If algorithmism is true, it's not just the algorithm, because then you get into the type token problem. But it's if
soul, who knows what happens? I mean, maybe God says, don't worry about the type token thing. Your soul's gonna hop.
See
a different instantiation.
Yeah. I mean, uploading would make sense on that.
Right? I mean, your soul, this is crude, but your soul's hopping to a different token of this in a way. So, there I just say, like, ask your religious advisor.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe some philosopher of religion, like Peter von Inwagen has something to say about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't have anything to say about it because, I'm not ready to appeal to a particular doctrine.
Sure. And I think that's one of the kind of ironic things about the upload is that they say, we are a pattern. We are an algorithmic pattern, and that's it. So we don't have a soul. So therefore we can upload. And it's like, wait, no, if you had a soul, then you could upload, but you want to reject that view in a view and then go for this like materialist view that you are this algorithmic pattern, but then you're not the same token instance that's passing on. So I just thought that was an interesting point there.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a shame because I think we, as a culture, really need to have deep discussions about the mind.
Yeah, totally.
Beyond crude appeals to mind as program, uploading, but it's hard because philosophy is difficult.
Yeah, that's right.
But people need to really think about this stuff, which is why I opened that center for the future mind to, if I could just move beyond the administrative stuff and get more done, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, so that's actually part of the thing I'm trying to do with the podcast is have deep conversations on hard stuff that you might have to listen to the episode 3 or 4 times to understand. It's a little bit of inside baseball. It's like an office hours instead of just a strict interview. But people can hear the deep stuff and they can they should go read your book, Artificial You, and then come back and listen to this again. What if someone was intrigued by you and the way you do philosophy, and they wanted to participate in the Future Mind Center for the Future Mind? What's that like? Like, do people apply, or is this postdoc stuff, or?
Yeah, we have postdocs.
Okay.
And I sometimes put out a call. We just hired some new tenure track faculty as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm real excited.
Awesome.
We got some cool junior faculty now. I wanted to hire everybody. That was torture.
Yeah.
There's so many interesting people. Oh my God. Yeah. But we're trying to start a PhD program right now. You can apply we have a super, super good PhD group in complex systems and brain sciences, a program started by Scott Kelso, Gary Perry, and others. Okay. So it's like, the kind of thinking I really love, like what you see at the Santa Fe Institute about complex systems. And you can do analyses of, say, the connectome and understand the mathematical principles that the brain utilizes and find that other complex systems also instantiate those principles of information transfer. So for me, these grad students are phenomenal, and you can apply into that program. I think now, though, you have to apply through computational neuroscience. Okay. So my center is full of grad students in that. Awesome. I have some great collaborators. And then if you want to do philosophy, you have to go in comparative studies, which we're designing a track right now, and it's going to be minds, machines, and persons track. And then we have to apply to the state of Florida to start a PhD program.
Okay. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. But we need a few more faculty. I mean, everybody retired when I got there. What did I do? There was one of those big packages and a whole bunch of people took it.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, yeah, it'd be nice to have a fresh start, even if it's tough. And I'm sure you have a ton of admin work.
It's awful. I got lured in by the beach. I wanted warm weather. I wanted to live in Boca Raton. I like literally live on the ocean.
Wow. So, did you get to see it, or are you stuck in the office doing all the admin stuff?
I'm out all the time. My teaching load is. Awesome. I'm on the beach all day. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Well, Dr. Schneider, thanks so much for all your time here. I wanted to finish with just one more question. Do you think we should be more worried about dumb AI or artificial general intelligence? Maybe we shouldn't be worried at all, but yeah.
No, you should be worried about both. Okay. But I think that there's a category that people don't notice, which I call savant systems, that are probably the most worrisome. So we're right now, we may have a Turing test winner with some of these text systems.
Okay.
These new, these systems. It depends on who the judge is.
Yeah.
But we're getting really smart systems. And once people start piecing together different kinds of systems into coherent systems, we're starting to get into general intelligence.
Yeah.
But as we do that, there will be systems that are not super intelligent and have terrible deficits. And I think those are the most dangerous. And I call those savant systems, like these idiot savants in psychology, who have superhuman abilities in some domains and massive deficits in others. And so you obviously don't want a computer with a social intelligence deficit that is excellent in strategizing
Yeah.
and is advising a president.
Right.
And of course, it depends on where, like, what the capacity of the machine is and who's utilizing it, right? I mean, humans are the real dangerous one.
Sure. Yeah.
But today's systems can do damage. I mean, look at Facebook algorithms,
Sure.
right? I mean, and it's funny because I notice this a lot in the media. The experts have these fights over which is worse, right? And they get into these. I'm like, you guys are eating your own, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a worried budget. It's not like, getting research funding.
Yeah.
It's like you can all be worried together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
It's all bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, AI is good in lots of ways, but there's lots of danger and risk,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. I go back and forth between being terrified and being super optimistic. But I hadn't thought about the savant level. That's a really fascinating thing. I'll have to think more about that. But Dr. Schneider, this has been really huge. If someone, one again, I'll hawk this book because it's an amazing book. Artificial You, AI and the Future of Your Mind. It's a couple years old now. Very, very good. Go and grab that book. But if someone wanted to hear more from you or read some of your stuff, where could they find you?
They could go to my website. I have a lot of freebies there.
Awesome.
Schneiderwebsite.com.
Okay.
And if they want to join the center, they can get in touch with us and get on the mailing list. We have virtual events, or if you're in the Florida area, or come to, soon we'll be starting conferences. We just opened.
Okay.
I'm planning a Mind Fest in February, I hope. Yeah. Oh, you should come.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I gotta start doing that. I just turned in grant applications. That was torture.
Yeah.
Human torture.
That's where you need the AI for that. Yeah, you need a savant for doing that.
Yeah, can you imagine like GPT-3 doing it? Yeah. I know, because GPT-3 can write a B paper.
Whoa, okay. In what field, I guess?
Well, do you remember that for a while you could get the philosopher's version of GPT-3, and I think they took it off the web.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, that's one thing I forgot to ask you. I was nervous about with your ACT test. You're like, we might be training these people, or we might be training these AIs to be better philosophers than some of the philosophers, and putting people out of their jobs. They might make the ACT 2 test that's even better than yours. Scary. Oh, I'm just starting. I'm in a master's, still. I need to get a job before I lose them all.
I know, right? I mean, don't even get me started. Yeah. I mean, it may be that we have to, enhance our brains in order to keep up.
Right. That's the Jetson fallacy, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't assume the future is like Star Wars or the Jetsons, where the humanoids are unenhanced, right? I mean, they will probably be highly enhanced. And that's the worry, though, because if we move into this future, letting the tech companies decide with their, shallow conceptions of the mind, where are we headed, right? I mean, we're headed to, speaking of science fiction, cyberpunk dystopia, quite possibly, in which—
and not the cool ones,
Yeah, not the cool ones, right? I mean, we knew, this is coming when Zuckerberg renames his company Meta.
I know.
Vincent's metaverse, and that's a dystopia, right? It's like, he thought it was great. Oh my God.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I try not to worry too much.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Dr. Schneider, for all your time. It's very valuable, and I'm very excited about what you're doing. I hope to be in contact and check some of that stuff out. And yeah, hopefully all the funding comes through, and I'll post it out on my stuff too, and get the word out for all the mind dorks out there that this is a new thing. This is awesome. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts.
Definitely. That'd be awesome. Okay. All right, folks, that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensees, and as always, all glory to God.